Welcome to the last session of our Community Change webinar series. Today's session is entitled Collective Impact 3.0 with Liz Weber and Mark Kabaj. The practice of collaboration has evolved since the first article about collective impact went viral in 2011. Many communities are implementing collective impact strategies, and there are early signs of results. There is also now critical mass of learning that points to the need to upgrade the initial collective impact framework. Liz and Mark have been working on collective impact initiatives since 1997, and today they'll share their insights about the evolution of collective impact and what it will take to get to transformative community change. I'd like to welcome our speakers, Liz Weber and Mark Kabaj, to the call. Liz is the Vice President of Tamarack and leads the Tamarack Learning Center. Previously, she led the Vibrant Communities Canada team, where she provided coaching, leadership, and support to a network of community partners across Canada. Liz is one of Tamarack's most in-demand trainers. She has developed and delivered curricula on a variety of workshop topics, including collaborative governance, leadership, collective impact, community innovation, influencing policy change, and social media for impact and engagement. Prior to joining Tamarack, Liz was the director for the Hamilton Roundtable on Poverty Reduction, which was recognized with the Canadian Urban Institute's David Crombie Leadership Award in 2009. In her career, Liz has also held leadership positions with YWCA Hamilton, Volunteer Hamilton, and Volunteer Canada. In 2002, Liz completed a Master's of Management through McGill University, and her thesis, Storytelling and Voluntary Sector, was published. Liz was awarded a Queen's Jubilee Medal in 2002 for her leadership in the voluntary sector, and in 2004 was awarded the Women in the Workplace Award from the City of Hamilton. Mark has spent 25 years as a social change practitioner, policymaker, funder, and consultant in Canada, the US, and Europe. He is a former Vice President of Tamarack and was the Executive Director of Vibrant Communities Canada, one of the country's first and largest collective impact initiatives. Mark is now the president of Here to There Consulting, currently focusing on developing practical ways to understand, plan, and evaluate efforts to tackle complex issues, for example, neighborhood renewal, poverty, community safety, environmental sustainability. This includes playing a strong role in the building the practice of development evaluation, using evaluation to inform the work of social innovators working in fast-moving contexts, as well as practical methods for social innovation, systems change, and collaborative action. Welcome to you both. I'll now turn it over to Liz and Mark.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. I wonder if we can go to the next slide and enter into the participant poll that we have available, and we hope that those of you that are on the line and have access to the computer will join us in this participant poll. For us, for Mark and myself, writing the Collective Impact 3.0 paper was really just an opportunity to do a little bit more thinking and put some of our ideas on paper for you. And so our poll is really a chance to engage with you at the front of this webinar around the degree to which you support the idea that now is the time for us to work together to build Collective Impact 3.0. So we hope that you will now vote, or if you haven't voted already, that you'll take that opportunity so that we can begin to see, you know, the answers and the degree to which, you know, it's actually time to continue to build on the framework of collective impact. Deanna, how many people have completed the poll?
So we've got about 79–80% of our listeners have participated. It looks like 10% are saying they strongly disagree. 14% are unsure, 46% agree, and 31% strongly agree. So it looks like the majority of people on the line are sort of falling in the area of agreeing that this is the time.
Oh, great. Well, thanks everybody for answering the poll, and thank you also for joining us and engaging in this conversation. I think we'll move to the next slide, and I'll turn it over to Mark to share with the listeners, with all of you, the reasons why we thought about this evolution in the collective impact revolution. Mark?
Yep, thanks Liz, and thanks everyone for voting. Liz, interesting poll results that I was just musing that perhaps 5 years ago we would have said unsure or strongly disagree. We wouldn't have felt any need to write an article. 5 years ago when we had just finished the first Lurch, the first 10-year campaign of the Vibrant Communities Initiative, we were feeling that something had been accomplished. We had learned something about how to work together, having not called it collective impact, but having a lot of those features, what we would now call maybe a prototypical collective impact effort. And when that excellent article came out, we looked at it, and I remember, I don't know if I said it, but I thought, wow, is this ever excellent? And Malcolm Gladwell's idea of tipping point came to mind, that this was so nicely framed at the right time by people that were quite credible, and really managed to package what we might say was a pattern of practice by many, many 1.0 participants of collective impact. And as we've chatted about this, it's really clear that this collective impact article, which we would call the opening of 2.0, triggered a lot. It triggered a lot of more people participating in this. It legitimized this, and just a real flurry of practice and experimentation around the globe, and on almost an unimaginable array of different issues, where the simple idea was, if we wanted to move the needle together, we had to come up with a real sort of coherent and disciplined practice to do that. And by any measure, it's been a phenomenal 5 years. People have not only experimented, but many people, certainly at the center, have been sort of documenting and trying to codify what has been emerging within that framework, new ways of doing things, new practices, new principles, new tools, and it's been a tremendous lurch. And in fact, I don't even know if there's any comparisons in the field of social change in the last while for that much dedicated practice building and dedicated sense making of the evolving practice. When we were discussing this not long ago, talking about where collective impact needs, we thought it might need to go, I think we thought it might be time for a 3.0 framing, for the simple reason that while the original 2.0 framework was really able to accommodate a lot of new insights and challenges, there were moments in time where we thought, you know, the 2.0 framing, even though it's got extraordinarily good bones, doesn't really accommodate all the kinds of things that are coming in. And just like any kind of technology or other social change framework, it might be worth saying, let's build on those good bones and offer a slightly new framing of what might come. And so, Liz, I think I can speak for you that we found it easy to start jotting down ideas about how we might reframe things, and also felt quite comfortable that it was still within the collective impact umbrella. And so this writing is as much for us trying to sort out our own thinking about the next iteration of this important framework for change, but also one that we for a second don't think this is the final word or even the only word. We are one of many in the field who buy into this general pattern of work, but want to go to the next level of work, want to address in maybe slightly different ways some of the operational and strategic issues that pop up as we try and craft and adapt this approach to our own local circumstances. So Liz, please chime in on this, but this for us we think is a very natural evolution of an extraordinarily good framework.
Yeah, I would totally agree with you, Mark. I think we're trying to build on some pretty good bones.
We are, and then the framing that we've come up with, again, we might not even find this is the right framing in a couple of years from now, but it felt pretty good this summer as we were jotting these things down. So maybe we'll go to the next slide. Oh, I guess we have to do some populating of these slides here. Let's see if it all pops up. Here's our framing of the kinds of shifts that we think might happen. And you'll see that on the left-hand side of the slide, we have sort of the traditional ways of working, where this is what would collective impact addressed head-on. We wanted to shift from specialized agendas to common agendas, from fragmented measurements to shared measurements, from independent activities of players to mutually reinforcing activities, sporadic communication to continuous communication, and unsupported efforts to backbone infrastructure, which was originally called backbone organizations. So that was the magic, the distillation of this practice that captured people's imagination, legitimized things that people were already doing before, many people, but also opened up and revealed new ways of doing things to people who maybe were not there yet. We think those bones are good, and here was our best crack at framing a possible 3.0 version. And Liz, 5 of them, as you know, we thought those were roughly right, but we wanted to add a foundational one, which you're going to speak to more specific shortly, and that is shifting from a management paradigm, which no one has really advocated in the FSG movement, not the FSG, the collective impact movement, but we see many people in our own practice defaulting to that. A management paradigm where collective impact looks like a better framework to manage existing systems amongst conventional players, to a movement building paradigm which says, you know, the cornerstone there is acting like an organization, thinking like a movement. We need a lot more than the traditional suspects stewarding these change processes. So Liz, you'll speak more about that. And the other 5 shifts, which we'll go into, moving from a common agenda to a community aspiration, of which a common agenda is part of, embedding shared measurement within a strategic learning framework, acknowledging and embracing mutually reinforcing activities, but doing so where we're focusing on high leverage and an emphasis on changing systems, not mutually reinforcing by itself. It's got to be part of a bigger package. And again, the intent of the framework is that, but we wanted to make that even more explicit. Continuous communication as important, but a subset of authentic community engagement, and which, by the way, was acknowledged as a new principle in collective impact and the key principles of practice that came out not long ago. And taking this framework of backbone organization, which is legitimized in a way that other frameworks have not, the importance of that infrastructure in the background, to add a new curl to it, which is creating a container for community change. And that's the one that we've got the most feedback on so far, but and it's tricky and nuanced, but we're happy to throw it out there. So Liz, these 6 shifts, in your mind, was it easy or difficult to come up with these?
You know, I think, Mark, when we were thinking about and starting to write this paper, it wasn't all that difficult. I think we went back and forth on, you know, the kind of the shifts, but it's really based largely on, you know, now more than 15 years of practice that Tamarack has been engaged in, both, you know, through our Vibrant Communities effort, but also through our Deepening Communities effort. And also, I think Tamarack's role as a partner and co-catalyst with FSG around the Collective Impact Initiative. So I don't know that it was so difficult. I think it was, you know, just an opportunity for us to really articulate some of the practice that we've been engaged in, and also to bring in to light some of the people, you know, other people in their practice that we have been following both prior to the publication of the first article of Collective Impact, but also since then. And so if we go to the next slide, maybe what we can do is dive into the this whole notion of moving from this management paradigm to movement building. And I think, you know, for me, having kind of led a collective impact initiative on the ground, this to me is really a big shift, right? Is how do we move away from the notion that, you know, we are just coming together around this table to do this work, to really embedding it in our community and having the community believe that they can move the needle on obesity, or they can move the needle on teen suicide, or whatever issue they're trying to move the needle on. And I think, you know, this is something that has been at the very core of Tamarack's thinking for a long time. How do we, you know, and really informed, as you said, by folks like Alan, Vicky Admansky and others, how do we, you know, think like an organization, but really act like a movement? And I think in the paper we've explored it quite deeply, but there are some kind of characteristics that are really critical to movement building, and that is really to say, you know, how broad and diverse can a group of folks be around our table, including those folks that don't necessarily sit in the seats of power. So how do we get that 360 dynamic so that, you know, all the folks that are either considering the problem or are somehow impacted by the problem are engaged in the conversation about the problem or the opportunity. And it's really opening up the doors, both the traditional doors but also the non-traditional doors, to bring in those voices. And I think you're absolutely right in the recently released Principles of Practice, Collective Impact Principles of Practice. This principle was identified, as well as the principle of equity. The other, I think, important part of movement building is really the belief. It's that kind of open people's hearts and minds to new possibilities. And, you know, some of the issues that Collective Impact is trying to tackle, whether it's obesity or poverty or homelessness, they're often stigma-filled issues. And so how do we get people on board and believing that this is something that a community can come together around and tackle and make some real change around? And that's, that actually ties into another one of the shifts that we're going to talk about a little bit later around aspiration. But it is that kind of new possibility that, yes, we can do this together, and we can do it together. And then finally, to really not look at programmatic interventions per se, but to use Collective Impact as a platform to really look at some of those systems and policies and environments that are preventing the community from truly moving forward on this issue or this problem or this opportunity. And so to really look at the systems level of this work. And I know you like to use the phrase a lot, and one we learned in Vibrant Communities, to have the bird's eye view and the worm's eye view. And the bird's eye view is really the systems. How is the system shifting and being shaped, and where are the opportunities to intervene? And then the worm's eye view is also looking at, okay, so what's happening on the ground for people that are being impacted by the problem. So that's, for me, the movement from management to movement building. Anything you want to add here, Mark, before we go on?
No, except to say, of course, it opens up a big discussion about, you know, the art and science of movement building, and there's so much known about that and so much yet to be learned, Liz. But maybe we could end this point by you confirming. You have a great quote that mostly confirms the why of this, and it's about 24 people around a table. And I think that's in the article, and it's a powerful way to remind people that this has got to be a movement building enterprise. Do you remember the quote, Liz?
I don't right off the top of my head, so maybe you can fill that in.
Something to the extent that there's no way a community can change, even with the 25 of the most committed people around the table. They by themselves can't move the needle on these things.
Yeah,
you need
that's
to
absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Finish your quote.
That we need to unleash the ingenuity of the entire community. We need their insight. We need their ownership.
Yeah, and I really believe that that is fundamental. So this is we think one of the, even though it seems like a shift, I don't think it was as strongly articulated in the first couple of papers written about collective impact, and I think it is kind of foundational to this work, and probably something that a lot of our listeners are already, you know, paying attention to as in their practice of collective impact. Let's move on to the next slide, where we look at continuous communications, the move from continuous communications to authentic engagement. And this is really, it builds on that notion of movement building, right? And this is really, you know, we've heard this from the work of Jay Connor and from Rich Harwood and many, many other practitioners in the field of community engagement, that it really is a need to put community at the center of the community change process. And, you know, when they're at the center, when community is truly engaged in this work, they start to identify both small opportunities but also seismic shifts that potentially can be engaged in. And so it really is critical that community is at the center and bring that 360-degree insight into the issue. But also, as you start to move your collective impact efforts forward, this notion of authentic engagement creates this larger constituency in your communities that are going to be practically engaged in the work of change. And some of it might be connected to the collective impact work that this table is trying to advance, but some of it might also be stuff that's going on in parallel and new opportunities that might present themselves and might be able to be leveraged. And I know that, Mark, the other day you quoted this as, I think it was a Greek phrase, and you probably know the Greek or Latin behind it, but that the whole idea of nothing about us without us. This is really critical in community development work, asset-based community development work, but what we've learned when we've applied this notion in collective impact work in Canada, that the work gets deeper, the thinking behind the problem, the solutions that appear are more in focus and more useful to the community and more practical to the folks that are being impacted by the issue. And then finally, I think we've watched FSG and others really talk about, in the Collective Impact Forum, really talk about this notion of an equity lens and employing an equity lens in collective impact work. And I think that that is very critical to really dive into the problem, the issue, the opportunity from that equity lens, and to really get an understanding of that. So this is the second, it's not necessarily a shift, it's really saying, yes, we need to focus on community, continuous communications, but we also have to bring in this notion of authentic engagement, and that's why it's a plus on that previous slide. The final one that I'm going to talk about before I turn it over to you, Mark, is the whole idea of moving from a common agenda to shared aspirations. So if we could move to the next slide, Stephanie. Again, we like to think of this, and for those of you that have participated in any of Tamarack sessions, we often talk about this. We borrowed this phrase from our colleague Jay Connor. The difference between a good movie and a bad movie is that in a good movie, everybody is making the same movie. And if you think about that from the perspective of community change initiatives, a movie, you'll have directors and actors and a whole bunch of people, and if they all are making slightly different movies in their heads, then practically you're going to have a movie. And so a common agenda gets you to making the same movie. A community aspiration really takes you to that next level. It really says this is more, what we work on together is more than any of us singly can accomplish. So we need to bring that wide tent, and we need to invite as many people as possible in to both talk about the problem, the issue, or the opportunity, but also then to work collaboratively, collectively together on the issue, the opportunity that presents itself. And so in Hamilton, we, as you heard in my bio, I led the Hamilton Roundtable for Poverty Reduction for a number of years. And so poverty is a tough issue, and it has lots of stigma attached to it. We use this notion of community aspiration as it was introduced to us by Jay Connor, and we said, well, yes, we want to work on poverty, but what if we took poverty from the lens of making Hamilton the best place to raise a child? And what is the possibility in that? What's the potential of that? And would that sufficiently engage, both the community of folks in Hamilton that were interested in poverty, but also reach out to folks, in the broader community who may not necessarily have thought about poverty, but certainly want the community to be the best place to raise a child. And so some of you might think, oh, that's a little bit disconnected from that issue. And it is in some ways, but in many ways it isn't, because if you have a large part of your community where there are children and families that are struggling every day, you're not going to be the best place for anything. And so through that aspirational statement, we were able to dive deep in the issue of poverty and to really reach deeply into our community, engage both the traditional folks that would engage with this kind of an issue, but many non-traditional folks that were brought into this idea of an aspiration and really have adopted it quite broadly. I think in the paper, Mark, we wrote about this survey that was done in the city of Hamilton about poverty reduction work, and this had happened a couple of years after we entered into this work. And the survey was, what should, to what degree do you think poverty should be on the election issue? And I think 80% of the citizens responding to that survey thought that was a critical issue. And so I think the role of an aspiration, a shared aspiration, really came into play in our work in Hamilton. So those are our three.
Liz, I'll just add something.
Of the first shift. Oh, sure, go ahead.
The pollster also said it's, I think it was he or she did not remember a time where 80% of people agreed on anything. Reinforcing how what a nice outcome that was that people shared in that aspiration.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the power, right, of both authentic community engagement, a shared aspiration, and this focus on movement building. Those three, I think, really hang closely together, and that's why I think we shifted up the conditions in this way. I think now, Mark, we'll turn it over to you, and maybe you can talk about the next three conditions.
Sure thing. So this next one is an interesting one, partly because so many people struggle with it, and Liz, we've chatted about this before, and I've written my own pieces on this, strongly in favor of shared measurement as part of a community change agenda, and for not only all the reasons that have been laid out in articles, but I also think that when people talk about shared measurement, it sharpens their thinking about what the outcomes are that they're trying to achieve. So I think the why here is overwhelmingly clear, but we are struggling with the how. And the short version of this, I think, is that often people rush to discussions of shared measurement without having first been a little bit more clear on their strategy that shared measurement is supposed to inform, and the processes with which they'll use to gather, analyze, make sense, and use shared measurement data. And the result is people spend a lot of time spinning on shared measurement and get caught up in technical issues, which are important, but without any compass points as to how, where to land on shared measurements, and they often don't spend as much time as they might on really emphasizing how they're going to make sense of that data and use it to drive strategy and figuring out if their data is actually used. We know from lots of research that the record on evaluation, the use of evaluation feedback in general is pretty grim, depending on the study, and I think we probably have the same general dynamic in shared measurement processes where we have evaluation and measurement challenges on steroids. Now, we know, and it's been positioned as such, that shared measurement is part of evaluation, and evaluation is part of strategic learning. But the article sort of reminds us of how important that strategic learning process is by comparing the history of how General Motors used to use data and Toyota used to use data, particularly when Toyota was really singing, and General Motors was data heavy and learning light. And Toyota, which used a more distributed real-time management system, was data light but learning heavy, and how that was considered a big factor in how those two organizations performed overall. The good news is this is, again, another example of just framing things in a certain way. It doesn't require a radical restructuring of the collective impact universe. There are shared measurement is clearly a part of a bigger process, and there are some really good resources on strategic learning, including, I think the best one is FSG's online, the framing of it, how to build a shared measurement system. So just a reminder to everyone, shared measurement as part of a strategic learning process, it'll be easier to create, and it'll be easier to design and adapt if it's meant to help inform and drive strategy in a way that the data is used. That's a big room, I know, Liz, but I think this is just an important reminder on something that many, many groups have already struggled with. I've seen too many instances where people rush to shared measurement, and you can feel the oxygen leave the room. It doesn't have to be that way. Second one, let's go to the mutually reinforcing activities to give a quick highlight on that. When this article, the first article came out, this was my favorite phrase because I thought it's so elegantly simple and captures so much of what is required in the field that we have to be more than the sum of our parts. when we do this work, and mutually reinforcing activities seems to capture that. So this is still my favorite from the original article. And we think it's still important, but it needs to be, it would be productively couched in a slightly wider lens, which says the big issue in collective impact is to focus on where there is leverage. And there might be lots of leverage places for change in a system, but there are also, there's a tendency in our field that's well documented, well before collective impact framing came along, that people collaborate on areas where they can collaborate and try and be more than the sum of the parts, but they're often areas that are quite low leverage in the first place. And a great example of this, and there's tons of data on this, is the long history of coordination and collaboration and integration in the human services systems. And the case for doing that is really strong. There have been some successes in that area through decades of efforts to do this, but the data has also said not only is it tough as nails to do for reasons that have to do with the larger systems in which human services are embedded, the silos that exist, but that the effects on tackling complex issues and the outcomes for families, that's not necessarily stellar. It's highly uneven. And so while one would want to have human service coordination and integration in any part of a collective impact portfolio that requires some changes in the human services system, that may not be a high leverage area by itself. We're really interested in high leverage, and that might mean sometimes that we actually compete as well as tightly collaborate on those issues. We know that Brenda Zimmerman, who is really good at that, says when you're working in a complex system, you need to be able to compete or cooperate as the situation demands. And there's examples of that, including the classic example in Tillamook County, Oregon, where people agreed that the outcome was to reduce teen pregnancies, but they disagreed on the pathway to get there. And so they all employed slightly different strategies. The school board did training, the health unit did safe sex promotion, and the very large faith-based community preached abstinence. And the cumulative effect, they all had slightly different strategies, but the cumulative effect was a 75% reduction in 10 years in teen pregnancy. So different things triggered different effects in different groups. So in that case, some version of competition, or at least coexistence, was useful. So yes to mutually reinforcing activities if it's done in a way that is mindful of trying to get high impact strategies, and mutually reinforcing might mean cooperation or competition depending on the issue. Liz, any reflections on that one before I go to the third one?
No, I agree with you, Mark. I think that the potential of mutually reinforcing activities is a really exciting condition of collective impact. And I do think, that in the early stage collective impact initiatives, we often see groups move towards alignment of programs and services, pre-existing programs and services, and that's good. That's an early step, but it's also then starting to say that not everything is equal. And so how do we look at leverage? How do we look at things that can work together, but also, as you mentioned in the example, things that might work separately and still drive towards the outcome. So, yep. Yeah, it's a great condition.
Well, again, and just a slight reframing of the original one, because we think those bones are excellent. And so, but the sixth one, Liz, is the one where so far we've got the most feedback of a safe container to complement the idea of a backbone infrastructure. So let's go to that one. So this one is in some ways the trickiest to have framed, and we did, Liz, I think that, I don't know about your feedback, but this is the one that where people have said they either really like it or they are not certain about it, or some people even disagree. Have you gotten the same pattern of feedback?
Yeah, I mean, certainly people are curious about this one and why we call it a container, and I think that it is a little bit of a reframing or a little bit of an addition to this notion of backbone. So why don't you take us through it, Mark?
Well, and I'm highly informed by the excellent work of Rios Partners on this, particularly Adam Kahane and his book on solving complex issues, and transformative scenario planning, and Zaid Hassan's book on social innovation, and many of the people who might have participated in things like art of hosting. So here's the upside. We've legitimized the role of the backbone infrastructure. confirm that it's infrastructure, not organizations, because we saw a plethora of new organizations being developed, all serving one or two collaborations. And we've done a real good job of documenting the different ways that these organizations add value or provide roles, knowing that that's always customized. So to use someone else's language, we've really framed the outer game of change and transformation. What a lot of people in this business, who've been in this business for a while, have also referred to is this inner game of change, and argue that you can do planning and systems mapping and collaborative meetings and data, et cetera, and that needs to be done better, and it needs to be clear and transparent and involve a lot of people. But if we don't change the inner conditions of ourselves, the leaders, the people who come into this space, to allow ourselves to get truly new insights into the nature of the problems, to acknowledge our own complicity in keeping some systems going, to acknowledge our own fear in trying to make change, admitting we don't know things, having conversations with powerful enemies, we might even call them, people who we viscerally disagree with but need to be in the same room, able to manage the conflict that is endemic because of different values, interests, and positions on almost any complex issue we're dealing with. If we can't create a space where diverse people manage their own inner journey and relationship with others, we may be missing a big part of the change effort. And I've referred to a couple of examples in the past, and these pale in comparison to the stuff that Rios has written about, where people who paid attention to this inner game of change and creating the safe space for people to sort of let go, work on conflict, work on different worldviews, etc., have generated extraordinary outcomes. And one of them I'll point to early is the Energy Futures Lab in Alberta, where 40 people, diverse people from the energy system, are working on something extraordinarily difficult in Alberta, which is trying to accelerate the transition to a carbon-constrained future. And the framing they've used is excellent. It is trying to create a radical middle. It's in Alberta, the debates are polarized between oil and gas, between drill, baby, drill on one hand, that's one framing, and the other one is keep it in the ground. And they've argued, and other people will debate this, but this is their framing, we need to create a radical middle, not the radical polarities, so people can, from diverse interests, can find a way to work together in the middle, because the acceleration is happening. How do we accelerate this? How do people from diverse perspectives work together on this? And they've done an excellent job on this and have achieved some things that other change initiatives that were not paying attention to this inner game of transformation, creating a container for this to happen, may not have achieved. Liz, I've seen it a ton. You've also seen a lot of different examples. I don't know if you've seen the relevance of this framing in your own work.
Oh, absolutely. And I think the point that sticks out for me on this characteristics of containers is really this notion of trust and empathy. Particularly for each other and for this work. How do we grow trust amongst folks around the table and in our community who may not have the degree of trust to really go into pretty sticky issues or pretty sticky and stigma-filled conversations? And then how do we build the trust to say, okay, even if we have mutually reinforcing activities, not everything is equal, and make those decisions that are really decisions that are for the betterment of the community. And so, I think the notion of a container is a really interesting one that adds to backbone. So it could almost be backbone container. So that might be a little bit of an improvement here, or a backbone container for change, which I think is really critical in this work. Who convenes? Who sits around the table? How do we engage in an authentic way? How do we bring equity to the table? What are some of the governance issues? How do we think about the principles that are going to guide us when we get into those kind of sticky wicket questions? Those are all things that I think fit into a container for sure.
I agree. And some people, for those that are interested who want to know a bit more of this, I do encourage you to just Google Container for Change. You don't get a lot of feedback on that, but Rios' writings on transformative scenario planning and change labs, as well as Art of Hosting, have done some really good stuff on this. So, another frontier, Liz. Liz,
Yeah,
that's our
and
6. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, they are our 6. And the other thing I just wanted to add in, and I know you mentioned it, Mark, this notion of a backbone container actually is fairly adaptive to all sorts of different collective impact circumstances, right? So we know that there isn't a single kind of backbone infrastructure, and so this backbone container also provides that kind of the ability to be adaptive.
Yep, yep. And Liz, just as we're finishing these 6, I'm reflecting on our not really our nervousness, but our uncertainty about whether to write this or not earlier on, because on one hand, I remember someone telling us, why would you add new things? You're just going to irritate people, right, who are finally getting their minds around this. And our motivation for this was sometimes in this field, and we've all been, those who've been around for a while, we rush to a certain idea and we converge on it fast, and we make it rigid and try and make it a recipe and kind of approach. And then if the recipe doesn't deliver or we've converged too fast, we get frustrated with that and we throw it out. And we are saying definitely this is gold. There is a lot of important things here, and in order to not get frustrated with some of the things that it doesn't immediately reveal, even with all the excellent upgrades, we think it's worth our field as thoughtful practitioners to engage in this kind of dialogue. And our opening thoughts here we feel comfortable with, and I think I could speak for you, Liz. We may very well change our mind in 24 months in some of these, right? These are just our best thoughts right now, but we wanted to contribute to the field's thinking on this and ask other people to do the same. They may have different framings of this, and they may have different angles on this, and all of it is useful if we're all kind of bought into the same idea that in order to move the needle on complex issues, we've got to come up with frameworks and patterns of practice that are nicely captured in the general intent of collective impact. So this is field building work, and this collective impact approach is clearly unfinished business. It's directionally correct, but it's unfinished.
I would agree with you, Mark, and I think if we could turn to the next slide, Stephanie, I think it for us is also, that notion of unfinished, right? Because we think this is the first article, but we have in our conversations thought about other things that we would like to write about, and here are some of the other topics that we're hoping to tackle. We're also paying really close attention to the Collective Impact Forum and what people are putting on the forum and posting in other places as well in terms of your thinking around, how collective impact as a framework can really be dynamic and can really help advance the field of community change practice. I think that's our intent. I think now, Mark, what we'd like to do is to open it up for people's comments and questions. And, if you have a question, if something sparked an idea, if you think we missed the mark on something in the paper or on this webinar, we'd really invite you to type that into the chat box. And we have Sienna, who has been watching the chat box in real time, and she'll be sharing the questions with us or your comments with us. So, Sienna, is there anything that's appeared in the chat box at this point?
Hi, yeah, we have a few questions. So the first question that came through is from Michael, and Michael is asking, given that the key drivers of disparity are tied to ethno-racial background, for example, First Peoples and peoples of color, gender identity, ability or disability, sexuality, age, family makeup, immigration status, etc., how do we best ensure that these socio-demographic inequities are made consistently visible and that the voices from these groups and communities are effectively heard?
So, Mark, do you want to try to tackle that?
It's too hard. No, I want to say on the tactics of that, of course, it sort of always depends on a case-by-case basis, but what I think the reframing of some of these things allows, including this idea of safe container and movement building and authentic community engagement, is these improve the probabilities that one can get to those things. And I'm actually going to refer quickly to a case study here in Edmonton. Edmonton has a very ambitious poverty reduction plan, like many other groups, and it's got the same dynamics of any other collective impact effort. There's a lot of people involved, lots of moving parts. It's a tricky thing to implement, and it's got a real good start. We'll see how it unfolds from here. But one of the things I love a lot about that plan is they talk about game changers, and one of the which is why will this be not like the things that have come before? And one of the game changers is acknowledging racism as a central part of the poverty reduction challenge, including elevating the issue of reconciliation, which is, of course, a big part of the Canadian story from here on in moving forward. And that feels way different than even 10, 15 years ago when we started this work, where one would not have touched that stuff at all. So there is a discussion about racism. There's work going on around trying to uncover the structural dimensions of racism in Edmonton and its relation to poverty, etc. So the tactics of how to do that are tricky on a case-by-case basis, but this framing, I think, encourages people to at least to go there and make it part of the DNA of the story of change. Liz?
Thanks, Mark. No, I totally agree with you, and I think that, you know, what we've witnessed with the practitioners of collective impact, both, you know, in Canada and the United States, and some of the recent thinking of FSG and the Collective Impact Forum, the idea of, you know, authentic community engagement, the equity lens, and then I think what you've just brought up, Mark, which is really surfacing these very difficult conversations and saying, you know, how are we going to use this collective work to tackle these difficult issues is, I think it's critical to, you know, community change efforts for sure. Next question, Sienna.
Yeah, of course. So we have another question here from Charlotte. And so Charlotte says, high leverage opportunities may be more effective, but they can also be threatening to the existing system. So how do we overcome the feeling of threat?
Liz, you want to go ahead with that one and I'll follow?
Sure. I guess Jay Connor, I'll refer to Jay Connor, you know, and his thinking on this, because I think, you know, at the end of the day, Jay would ask me the question when I was in Hamilton, you know, are you about protecting your job, or are you about doing the good for the community? And, you know, I think that it feels that is a threatening question, right? But that's the kind of questions, those are the kinds of questions that we have to enter into. So what is this work truly about? And then how do we, you know, really look at this as being for the good of the community, and recognizing that working towards the good of the community, that something else will emerge on the other side that will be more powerful. And it you know, there, in any kind of community change effort, I think there is going to be that kind of big notion of change. I've been reading this book recently by Jay Samit called Disrupt You, and he talks about, you know, all the disruptive forces that have happened, you know, largely in the private sector over the last 10 or 12, 20 years. And if we even think about, you know, how we use communication now and you know, all of that kind of stuff to do the work that we're doing, all of that disruption is present right now, and it's you know, threatening the way that we're working and the way that we're acting, but it's also a leverage for those kinds of things. And I think that we have to look at the conversation from both sides, right? What is the threat embedded in that change, and then what are the opportunities that are coming out of that possible change? And then, you know, how do we move forward on the opportunities, build up on the opportunities, and mitigate some of the threats? And I think that might be the strategy to enter into. But it is, you're absolutely right, that's a tough conversation. What about you, Mark?
Yeah, I think for me it's a two-part thing. Number one, to normalize, I like the phrase that if we're in the business of moving needles, we're in the business of systems change. And if we're in the business of systems change, all systems change begins with disruption. Disruption of a pattern, and hopefully it organizes into a better pattern if we, you know, do our work well, and it's unpredictable about whether it does. So normalizing that we better get good at it. Number two, taking some lessons from change management. There's a difference it's a pretty clear lesson now that if you're not involved in change, no matter how well it's communicated to you, people always emphasize if you don't understand it and feel that you can influence it rather than endure it, you're not going to be pleased, even if it doesn't affect your interest. So this participating, authentic engagement and participation is part of the story to taking the temperature down on that. But there, at the end, even after we've done all that, there will be issues around, threats and conflict, etc., that I think we have to normalize as part of the change process and get good at talking about, because there's going to be moments where it gets really gritty. And I don't know what happens on a case-by-case basis. You have to know in any given situation what the dynamics of that are, but it's going to be part of the story. This is why I like the idea of moving from management to movement building, and I'll quote, I forgot who we quoted precisely on this, but it's recorded there. Often managers in particular would rather live with the solution that doesn't work rather than a solution that they don't control. And that's endemic to all of us. And if we're serious about change, we're going to have to make this a transparent part of the change process, or an explicit part of it.
Well said, Mark. Sienna, any other comments or questions? Maybe we'll take one more.
Yeah, so this is a question from Patricia. I think it's an interesting one. So she's asking, if people don't know or understand how to collaborate, can they or should they follow 3.0, or should they be following the original principles that were laid out?
That's a very interesting question. Mark, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, I'll take a quick go at it. That's why I like the preconditions piece, and I'm glad that Liz is working on a version of that. There's something about, like, preconditions for doing collective impact are actually quite high. You wouldn't just pick this up thoughtlessly and saying, let's give it a run. There's lots of things that will improve the probabilities that this is useful if they're already in place in the community. One of them is, for example, I know Liz is going to touch on this, the presence of social capital. Are you working in a relatively trustful, socially capitalized community where people know each other, can handle conflict, etc.? This is really hard to do when people don't have relationships. So I think the bigger question is, do you take on collective impact 2.0, 3.0, whatever version of it is? And again, I think they're relatively close. There's just some slight reframing. Or do you say, maybe we're not ready for that. We don't meet some of the preconditions, however they're framed. Let's actually just start walking, crawling before walking and before running, and start building the collaborative muscles on some things that maybe aren't so ambitious. Collaboration is a muscle, it's an instinct, and it's a pattern of practice. And I think, Liz, you use, I don't know whose phrase this is, collaboration proceeds at the speed of trust. So building trust and capacity, that takes time, and when you feel you're ready to take on something as ambitious as collective impact, be it 2.0 or 3.0, you'll be ready for it. Liz?
Yeah, no, I would agree with you, Mark, on that. I think that, even if I were to look at communities and how they evolve, there's a certain amount, and Rich Harwood has written about this, there's a certain amount to consider in terms of community readiness and, their readiness for change. And I think that being thoughtful about that, looking at capacity issues, looking at urgency issues, those preconditions I think are critical to, entering into collective impact. And also, I think it is. I think it's wise advice that you just gave around, building your collaborative muscle. The work in Hamilton wouldn't have happened if there wasn't some pre-existing work, pre-existing collaborative work that had already gone on in the community. The collaborative muscle was able to be built, and we were able to leverage that. So I think it's really good advice. So with that, we'll stop here, but Sienna is going to take the questions and share them with Mark and I, and we do a post-event email. So we're really interested in all of your comments and questions, and we'll try to respond to some of the questions that we weren't able to respond to during the course of the call. And now I'm going to turn it over. Oh, sorry, Mark, did you have one more thing? No.
and even critiques, folks. We feel confident in sharing what we've shared, but we've already had some real nice critical feedback, and it's been excellent. That people see different things, and we're all trapped in our own experiences and thoughts. So critiques to the paper are also extraordinarily welcome. We want it all.
Absolutely, and we'll be able to, at the Communities Collaborating Institute, go a little bit deeper with some folks as well. So we're looking, both Mark and I are looking to this as kind of the beginning of the conversation and continuing the conversation. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Stephanie to do a little bit of a wrap-up of this call and to tell you what's up next. So Stephanie, over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Liz and Mark, for sharing your insights and perspectives with us on the call today. And thank you, everyone, for your questions. It definitely challenged our Tamarack leaders and made it a very dynamic conversation. So thank you for that. And we'd also like to thank our supporters, Human Resources and Social Development Canada, Maytree Foundation, J.W. McConnell Family Foundation, and the Province of Ontario for making these calls possible. We just want to remind you to be sure that you're signed up for Engage. Engage is an online magazine published monthly that provides the latest thinking through articles, news, and resources for community change leaders. And again, we'll be circulating this slide deck around to you guys in the post-event email that Liz was talking about, so you'll have all this information at your fingertips as well after this. And we want to remind you that we are personally inviting you to the inaugural Community Change Institute. It's taking place in Toronto this fall from September 26th to 30th, so we're only a few weeks away. This 5-day event will feature 4 world-renowned speakers, including Stephen Patrick, 40 workshops, and over 250 change makers from across the globe. So again, details can be found on our website and through clicking on this slide deck as well. And as Mark mentioned, we love to hear from you, so if you have any feedback on either the paper or the webinar, feel free to reach out to us at tamarack@tamarackcommunity.ca or to myself or Liz, and my email is stephanie@tamarackcommunity.ca. So thank you again, everyone. Thank you, Mark and Liz, and be sure to look out in your inboxes for the recording, slide deck, and any other articles that we mentioned. So thank you, everybody. Have a great day.